All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome to the first quarterly Encuentro of the year of the Public Land and Ocean Colectivo. Joining y'all from University of Utah's booth here in Salt Lake City. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Olivia Juarez. I'm the Public Land Program Director, one staff member of the Public Land and Ocean Colectivo at Green Latinos. We're so excited to bring y'all some incredible honorary guests and leaders in our fight for our environmental liberation by conserving ecosystems in their natural states. So we're just going to get right into it. We have a really exciting packed agenda for y'all. Um, as you know, if you've been facilitating any Zooms in your day-to-day life, it's a little hard to see what's going on between the slides and the chat and looking at all of your faces. So if at any point during this session, if you have any comments, if you have any questions, want us to dig into anything a little bit deeper, I encourage you to use the hand raise function, which might help us see you if we miss a chat, or just come off mute and give us a, hey, can I ask a question? This space is your space. The space is a discussion space. So we hope that you can engage with us in that. Next slide, please. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about the colectivo and the focus of our encuentros. So the Public Land and Ocean Collective, or colectivo, is a community for anybody vested in the permanent conservation of lands and waters across the states and territories. So no matter what sector you come from, nonprofit, business, academia, and the issues that really center and focus your environmental work, the Public Land and Ocean Colectivo is a place for you. Since Green Latino's inception 15 years ago, we exist to get people connected to each other, to different resources, so that we can win our fights for our environmental liberation. So that's something that our Public Land and Ocean Colectivo does through having these encuentros several times a year that feature our members and other climate justice and conservation justice leaders. We have our newsletters where we gather different resources and interesting bits about our disproportionate issues affecting Hispanic, Latino, and communities of color, and share resources with y'all through that, as well as use all Green Latinos media, from our newsletters, our blog, our social media, as a platform for you to get some attention on your campaigns and get people supporting your fights for environmental liberation. And then, of course, the Colectivo is a place to connect, build relationships, open lines of communication with other leaders working on climate, environmental, and conservation justice issues in the field. So we moderate a listserv with hundreds of our closest friends in the land and ocean conservation space. So you can ask questions of each other, get connected to different grants, different training opportunities, share the new job opportunity that your org is having, and so on and so forth. So if you're here, we're assuming that you are a member of the Green Latinos Public Land and Ocean Colectivo. But if you're not, if you heard about this by following us on social media and signing up, or got forwarded the invite in a listserv, we encourage you to join the Colectivo by going to greenlatinos.org/join. Our encuentros are these Zoom meetings, as well as in-person gatherings we do several times throughout the year to create a place for people of color and our allies working on our disproportionate climate and environmental issues to connect with each other, to coordinate advocacy, to improve and sharpen our skills, to honor cultures, and to share resources with each other. And so we're doing that today, centered around humedales, or wetlands. Before, I think I jumped in without introducing our interpreters. I'm sorry, and I wish that y'all stop me. So I'm gonna take a step back and pause and invite our interpreters too. give their statement about interpretation options we have available.
Gracias, Olivia. Thank you, Olivia. No problem. I'll just do a short introduction to help people get into the right interpretation channel. Hola a todos. Voy a dar una pequeña introducción para que podamos entrar en el canal de interpretación correcto. Mi nombre es Pablo y estoy aquí con mi cointérprete Ingrid de parte de Sensontle, una cooperativa de justicia del lenguaje de Asheville, North Carolina. Y entre todos creamos este espacio bilingüe. Muchas gracias por invitarnos. So my name is Pablo and I'm here with my co-interpreter Ingrid on behalf of Sensontle Language Justice Co-op from Asheville, North Carolina. And we will create this bilingual space together. So to start, please find the invitation icon in the Zoom toolbar. It looks like a globe, and then choose your language, in this case, English. If you're bilingual, you don't need to choose any channel. But if you wish to listen to the call and participate in English, please do choose that channel. Now, if you're connecting via smartphone, find the three dots in the bottom right corner of the Zoom toolbar, then choose language interpretation, click on English, and finally click on done so that it's actually turned on. Bueno, si están conectándose desde un computador, por favor busquen el icono de del globo terráqueo que está en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom. Luego busquen español y hagan clic ahí. Si están conectando desde un teléfono inteligente, busquen los tres puntitos en la parte inferior derecha. Luego hagan clic en interpretación de idiomas. Luego busquen español y hagan clic en finalizado para que se active. And a few friendly reminders to make interpretation easier and make sure that everybody understands what's being said. Please slow down or speak at a moderate pace and do it with a loud and clear voice, please. And if you're not participating, silence your microphone so that there's no background noise. Y unos recordatorios amigables para que funcione la interpretación y todos podamos entender lo que se está diciendo. Hablemos a un ritmo moderado y con voz fuerte y clara para que los intérpretes puedan seguir el mensaje y transmitirlo. Y si no están participando, por favor silencien el micrófono. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Pablo. Gracias. So I'll give you all a minute to make sure that you're adjusted if you need to set up your interpretation language. And then Cumbia, if you'll move us to the next slide, please. All right, so what we're gonna do with our time in our Encuentro today is we got a fun icebreaker activity for y'all. Then we're gonna hear from two incredible speakers. We have La Reina Quet, Chiefess and Head of State for the Gula Geechee Nation, who's gonna join us for a talk. Thank you, Queen Quet. And then she's gonna be followed by Francisco, an eco-poet, zoologist, and all-around wonderful land and water protector, who is going to lead some eco poetry and teach us about Great Salt Lake. And then we got some resources and announcements to share with y'all before we wrap up. But I want to take a minute or two to set the stage for y'all. We very selectively across our public land and ocean team selected this topic for our Encuentro, defending wetlands and shifting narratives, to serve as one small action that our community is taking to iterate that wetlands are essential for our environmental liberation. It's, I think, no matter where you are across the United States and territory, wetlands are easily put on the front lines of being being sacrificed for extractive uses, because people think if they're unused, they're left in their natural state, that they're a waste of space. And naturally, that's not true and not the case, but that mentality, that narrative about wetlands is what is causing the loss of wetlands. I want to give you an example of what's happening in my community in Salt Lake City that gives a really good picture of what the narrative about wetlands is doing to our communities and our ecologies. In recent years, the Utah State Correctional Facility was moved from a suburb in the Salt Lake Valley on the south end of the valley to onto the Great Salt Lake Wetlands, ostensibly because developers want the old state correction facility site, the prison, to be developed into housing and other multi-use areas. And they saw the wetlands as a wasted, desolate place. Mind you, Great Salt Lake Wetlands is what you'll hear from Francis today, essential, critical habitat for millions of birds and other species that kind of use the Great Salt Lake Basin as their migratory pit stop where they nest and rest and get food and make it possible to migrate across the continent and beyond. Um, so we're here to change that narrative that wetlands are desolate, wasted places, to say that the highest and best use of wetlands is in fact to root out a utilitarian view of ecosystems, period, to shift into a narrative about ourselves and our relationship with land, with water, with wildlife, and with each other. That's not about how much money you can get off of lands and what it's doing for you, but a shared and mutual respect for every being, living and non-living, human and more than human and beyond. Um, Wetlands and ecosystems everywhere are culturally and environmentally essential places for our peoples. And there are incredible projects happening across the country to show what it's like when a community defends, respects, and restores a wetland. And that's what those pictures are at the top of this slide. Um, in recent years, the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation purchased 350 acres on their ancestral land along the Bear River in Idaho, near Preston, Idaho, at the Bear River Massacre site. This is a place where an estimated 4,000 Shoshone people were murdered by the US Army in 1863. But as the a restoration project leader, Brad Perry, said, for thousands of years, this wasn't a massacre site. This place was a place for community. It was a place where families were. It's a place where culture lived and was developed, and through and through was a place that shows that example of everything living in relationship and respect with each other. Um, so this community place for the Shoshone tribe, which I will say doesn't have a tribal reservation, um, is a place for reclaiming the legacy of community and healing and righting wrongs from Indigenous-led initiatives through this restoration project that they're leading on these 350 acres. The area today that they purchased, and even less so today than in November, is loaded with invasive species like Russian olives that consume 75 gallons of water daily, which is contributing to the problem of declining Great Salt Lake ecosystem and severe loss of water from drought driven by the climate change. So the tribe is working with state and federal agencies to plant more than 300,000 native trees and shrubs. They're going to introduce the native Bonneville cutthroat trout into the river system over the next few years. And they estimate that the restoration effort can return 13,000 acre feet of water to the receding Great Salt Lake annually by shifting vegetation from invasive species to native species, cleaning up creeks, and restoring degraded agricultural fields to healthy, thriving wetland ecosystems. This project is going to augment the return of deer, birds, bobcats, coyotes, elk, and moose. And so I wanted to share a little bit about this story with y'all to relate that defending wetlands and shifting narratives is something that is actively happening right now, getting us closer to that 30% conserved land and waters by 2030 and beyond, helping repair uh, community harms and environmental harms that have happened for many generations and beyond. Watersheds of the lower 48 states have lost or lose 80,000 acres of coastal wetlands each year to erosion, sea level rise, development, and drainage. That's equal to approximately 7 football fields every hour and a 25% increase in loss of healthy coastal wetland land over the past 6 years during the study period that this quote came from. Um, so that's all to say is, and something really important to iterate is that wetland ecosystem health really affects public health and quality of life outcomes in communities of color, in coastal communities where um, people are exposed to some of the worst and most dangerous impacts of the climate crisis, but who also have opportunities to protect their communities through it by defending nature and allowing the ecosystem to protect us while we protect it. Puerto Rico is a really good example of where the problem and opportunity is really easy to say. Flooding, erosion, and loss of wetlands and other coastal habitats are among the most important threats to Puerto Rico's residents along the coast. And it's in particular a community in our country with rife violations of bedrock environmental laws, like doing environmental analyses before a project or straight up going past them and allowing resort builders or other private facility builders to rip out mangrove islands to build, their private facility and other projects like that, or block access to a beach. Um, so that's one impact of why it's really particularly relevant to our Latino community. And there's also really significant ongoing issues with the Clean Water Act. Maritza, if I can ask you to put you on a spot to say a little bit about that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Olivia, for grounding us in how wetlands are valued and or not valued across this country and territories. Another reason why we wanted to talk about wetlands as like the first thing this year was because recently the Supreme Court issued a decision on the Sackett versus EPA case, which was around which wetlands or waterways are protected under the Clean Water Act. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided that essentially that the water bodies that are protected have to have a continuous surface connection to water bodies, which we know is not how our wetlands are defined. Wetlands can be seasonally flooded or have different connections to water at different points. And so this is a big harm to wetlands across this country and territories because now the EPA had to comply with the Supreme Court decision, and it's making it harder for the EPA at the federal level to enforce protections. And so a lot of the protections for waterways and wetlands now fall to the states. And so again, we're just trying to show that we all have an important role to play when we think about our wetlands and those ecosystems and how we are connected to them, whether or not we see that every day. So yeah, that's just a little bit about what's happening at the federal scale around wetlands. Thanks, Olivia.
Thanks for rounding us out there, Maritza. Cumbia, if you'll go to the next slide, and Maritza will keep us going with our icebreaker.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, again, my name is Maritza Mendoza, she, her pronouns. And before we get into our awesome speakers and presentations, we just wanted to take some time to get to know who's here. It's always important for us to keep building community at these virtual spaces. So you'll see on on this screen, and I'll also share the link. We would love for y'all to share your name, pronouns, where you're calling from, and your affiliation or role, or who you're representing today. We would love to know which duck you feel like today and share why. And we will all share the duck that we most resonate with, and if in the group y'all could decide what kind of ecosystem represents the group, depending on how your ducks are showing up. And so please, we will break out into groups, and if you could assign one person to share to describe the ecosystem of your group in 1 or 2 sentences. We will probably only have time to share those in the chat, but we'll see what time we're at, and maybe 1 or 2 folks can volunteer to share out loud. And so one last thing before we break out is, if you do need Spanish interpretation, please just stay in the main room, and then we can have a breakout group here in this main room. So Cumbia, if you could open up the breakout groups, and I will share the Twitter link with the ducks.
And you can set the breakout timer for like 6 minutes, and that'll
Yeah.
give us time to do some verbal share.
Okay, I'm going to assign them now. Option 6 minutes. Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you all for joining us in this fun check-in question. Let me check the time. I think we have like a few minutes. Does anybody want to share out what ecosystem described the group? And you can also share in the chat. If you do, raise your hand or come off mute. Oh, well, I can share our group. I feel like we were kind of all over the duck square. And so Esperanza from our group came up with the ecosystem of flying because we're kind of like all over the place, moving all around. So we're in the air.
Thanks, Maritza. Our group had a lot of talking heads, and so we were allowed an ecosystem on a mission, and with lots to do, but also going with the cycles and the times. It sounded like some of the qualities of our ducks had to do with how we're working to get different resources, and so we described our ecosystem as being resourceful and making the best of what we have with the nutrients that are around there to thrive. So a lot extrapolated after some very relatable ducks.
Nice. Thank you, Olivia.
I could share about my group. So I was with Olivia and Bethany, and we picked 1, 2, and 9 for our ducks. And in terms of the ecosystem, we really were vibing with the ducks. So we thought about like a little meadow with the little frolicking ducks that are like going into a row into a pond. That's what we're really enjoying, the peaceful serenity of the check-in. So thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Val. And I see, yeah, there's a lot to do in a short amount of time. So just thank you all for indulging us with this. I think we can go ahead and I will introduce our speakers. Cumbia, if you could go forward to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So I am honored to introduce both of our speakers today. And so our first speaker is Queen Quet, who is the chiefess and head of state for the Gullah-Geechee Nation. She's a published author, computer scientist, lecturer, mathematician, a historian, a columnist, a preservationist, an environmental justice advocate, environmentalist, a film consultant, and the archivist. She is the founder of the premier advocacy organization for the continuation of Gullah-Geechee culture, the Gullah-Geechee Sea Island Coalition. Queen Quet has advocated across the halls of Congress, the White House, the United Nations, and worldwide to represent the Gullah-Geechee Nation, Gullah-Geechee culture, and the Sea Island environments. We are really happy. I'm so happy to be able to learn from you today. Yes, and so yeah, please join me in welcoming Queen Quet in the chat, and I will also introduce our next speaker before we hand it over. So yes, our next speaker is Francis Go. If you could forward one slide, Cumbia. And Frances is a zoologist, an artist, multiracial poet. She's a manager of conservation outreach at Tracy Aviary in Salt Lake City, Utah. In her position, Frances coordinates and designs community science projects, surveys local bird populations, and creates science art. Her experience in the wildlife field spans from nonprofits, National Park Service, to natural history collections. She is passionate about supporting equitable conservation programs that serve both wildlife, and historically marginalized communities. Also excited to learn from you today, and please join me in welcoming Frances in the chat. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Queen Quet to kick us off. Thank you.
Get away, Chile, Jordan. Get away, oh, Chile, Jordan. Get away, Chile, Jordan. I want for crossover for see my Lord. If 100 children been here on the course with me, if you can take that slide down, you might see a little bit of where the day. Right now, this your day. In the Gullah Geechee Nation, on the Sea Islands, and things like that. Right here, the way 100 children would have know plenty about the wetland. And see them every day. Because I live right here on this island, in the ocean, right of us, what they call the wetlands. So if you take down the slide, all 100 children can come down here. Just a little while with me, but center yourself on the coastline where the marsh and thing to be, and so that you can get it a little bit more and tune in with your soul and your spirit for me. So if you take down the slide for me, we'll be able to come, bring everybody to where we be, right here on these your islands in the sea. Now, this your day. If you see where I did, you see the water. And you go to get it, they gotta get you, we say, the water that bring me, the water going to take me back. But plenty of time when people are coming in, they look for everything. Look like this year. This year, the Atlantic Ocean. They ain't there but on one side, the way I be. Then I look for the grass and things like that. Where be the other as a place. Well, we the top we sustain in them. But if we sustain she sustain we. So, hola, mi familia. I'm so glad for being here with all 100 children. It's a blessing to spend Black History Month here with Green Latinos, talking about my project that y'all can put back up on the screen, greening Gullah Geechee communities. I wanted you to see the ocean first because many people, when they hear about the Sea Islands from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, they immediately think about the Caribbean or Caribbean islands, or they think of Puerto Rico. You see, they think about going there to those places and spaces and just getting to a shoreline and seeing ocean every time they go to the shore. But they don't realize here in the Sea Islands, most of our shorelines around many islands look like this, where in the front of this picture, you see the oyster beds or the oyster reefs. Then you see the Spartina or Spartina grass, depending on who's pronouncing it. We call it Tina. We like Spartina, okay? And then we have the waterways. So we are along the intercoastal waterway here. And that's sort of like the I-95 of the waterway coming through the Southeast. So it's critical to us that we work on things that are going to improve our water quality, but also just sustain this ecosystem that makes up the Sea Islands. The oyster beds keep the grasses in place. The grasses help to keep the roots of the trees in place so that we have maritime forests. And that way we sustain the entire islands. And by doing so, we can sustain our culture. As we always say, we the binya, we na guayna, we tall. So if we go to the next image, you'll see that our Greening Gullah Geechee Communities project actually starts to take people out into the salt marsh and get them to start to understand why it's so important. Because most of us sitting here, we would say we love the environment, but we probably love it because of what we've eaten from it. We probably love it because of the great memories of family and the things that we've done within these places and spaces, the beautiful birds that we've seen that sometimes we don't know what kind of bird it is. Our little exercise, we knew those were ducks, but sometimes you see something flying and you just go, whoa, because it comes out all of a sudden. And then you see the wingspan And sometimes you just marvel at it and say, wow, I wish I could get on those wings and just fly myself away from some of the other things going on down on earth, right? So when we look at salt marsh and we've grown up around it, we think of it as a place just for go get something for Nampa. So just to go out there and get a meal from, getting our shrimps, our crabs, and things like that. We don't often realize that it helps sustain the water quality. We don't realize that even the oysters, one oyster cleanses 50 gallons of water per day. So much less when we have hundreds or thousands of them on an oyster bed, what they're doing to help us to keep the water quality sustained so we have future generations of oysters, crabs, and various types of other seafood and sea creatures out there. So the marsh is a living space. And that's why we see oyster catcher birds and cranes and everything in there, because they're usually having their dinner from there, but they're also contributing to the balance that has to be there. So if we go to the next image, you'll see that all of this constitutes what is actually called a living shoreline. So our work in salt marsh preservation is to make sure we have this living coastline that will continue to keep the balance so that we have water quality, we have seafood industry, because we're subsistence fishing families here, like most indigenous communities are. We're not in it for the commercial nature as much as it is for our families to literally be fed. And I truly believe the more that we nurture Mother Earth and her waters, the more she will nurture us. We're all grown through water in the womb of our mothers. So here it is that look at all the things that are within the water, but then look at when that water meets the shoreline. So we started working with now 300 plus partners, some of them that are part of what I call the government alphabet soup, many of them that are a group called Surpass, that are working with us and even Pew Charitable Trust to do something called the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative. It is to restore and protect 1 million acres of salt marsh in the Southeast. So you would say, well, that's an amazing task. And we know it's a very daunting task when we have things like what the ruling we heard about a little while ago, and we have other things going to courts to try to prevent a lot of our environmental work from happening, and things that people want set in place that we know bring environmental harm to places and spaces like this. So even overbuilding here is a major environmental harm. Putting out too many docks, putting buildings right into the salt marsh or right onto the ocean shore has also led and contributed to ocean acidification. So that is yet another climate change outcome that we hope to help reverse by actually getting much of this coastline under conservation easements, and then being able to incentivize having families be stewards over their salt marsh front or waterfront properties so that they might be able to get cash incentives so that they have living shorelines there instead of building there. And that will help people have money to maintain a tax base on their land, and so that they can sustain the ownership here in the Gullah Geechee Nation between Jacksonville, North Carolina, and Jacksonville, Florida. So if we go to the last image, this is one of the things that we also see as critical that we do, because a lot of people don't realize that the emissions, we're always talking about carbon and carbon emissions, but we don't talk about them a lot of times in connection to the land and the water and what is actually happening. So here on the Sea Islands, many times we don't just have bridges that connect. We have these places called causeways that are often just built up pieces of land where we used to put shells and things and mound up more dirt, and you could go between islands. Then over time, they became more engineered, Well, now, as a person who's a computer scientist and mathematician, I studied engineering. So one of the things that we're now working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to do is to try to engineer new causeways, because we have a community safety issue now, because we have communities that are separated just by a creek and the salt marsh, that if we have sea level rise, they can't get off their islands, and we can't get emergency services to them because their causeways are flooded with water. They become inundated. And so now when that water goes back down off of all the asphalt, it pulls some of that with it. So we're right back in that cycle of environmental harm. So we're trying to protect more of the salt marsh so it can do its job of cleansing the things that come from runoff like that. And also salt marsh helps with flooding issues. And so while we help with these nature-based solutions, we also want to do some engineered solutions to improve places that are already engineered, like causeways connecting throughout the sea islands. So we're kind of balancing out the green and the gray in terms of adaptation processes. So this is some of the work that we're doing with Green and Gullah Geechee communities and the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative that are all part of my overall Gullah Geechee See and Me project. C stands for Saving Environmental Action, and Me is in the marine environment. So it's a blessing to have fellow allies and compatriots. Some will call us co-conspirators, like Green Latinos, that will work together to do this work collectively. And I also have some other partners that did a great story map that I'm going to drop a link in the chat. And it's wonderful to see a lot of my other partners and collaborators in the room today. Oh, I didn't want to grab it. Let me grab the link again. Maybe because when we went to our little breakout session, it switched things up. So I'll grab the link again and drop it in the chat, because I want you all to have a chance to interact with this story map that actually lays out some of our priorities, but also the priorities of other indigenous communities that are working throughout the United States on 30 by 30 initiatives, like what we're all here to do. So I say thank you to all 100 children. It is such a blessing to be invited here today to share with you and to have you come to my coastline with me for Black History Month. Peace, love, and blessings. Mi familia.
Thank you. Thank you, Queen, for sharing this with us, and also the story map. We have a few minutes for a question. If anybody has any questions for Queen Quet, please raise your hand or just come off mute. I have a question while folks are getting situated. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the role of storytelling and connecting to our history, and how that relates to mobilizing folks to protect wetlands, or as you were sharing, to be their own stewards of the land next to like where they live.
Well, first I'm going to say it's something that I deal with all the time, that term storytelling. Because when we say another story in Gullah, it means you're lying. So if someone says you're a storyteller, you're lying. So I always have to say to people, I prefer the sharing of our culture, or the sharing of our stories, as opposed to saying storytelling just because it's a cultural thing. But I grasp what you're saying, Sister Maritza. And so here it is that I have always been an advocate for going into communities of people and letting them tell me about their community, so that I get to learn about their culture and celebrate their culture with them. And I feel like if we all look at it, some people talk about America, they always talk about, oh, the great American melting pot. I always was against that. I was like, do not melt me into anything. You see, I like the salad bowl That way, if you love tomatoes, you could just eat the tomatoes. If you hate lettuce, you don't have to hate the lettuce. Just leave the lettuce alone. You know, someone else loves the lettuce. They'll have the lettuce. Some people like croutons. Some people don't like croutons. Well, that's fine. You don't have to hate on the crouton. Let the crouton sit there. It makes for a beautiful salad. And we can see the distinct nature of each and the flavor that each adds. So as people of color and people of culture, we add such a flavor to environments where others have whitewashed our story or eliminate them altogether. So I think it's crucial that we come in and give voice to it. Most of you know I'm a writer as well, but I always tell people, well, when you write it, it becomes a flat medium. It doesn't have breath. In order to have life, it must have breath. So when we speak it, it lives on. And we speak for generations. We speak our ancestral voices into these spaces. And that, I think, is what will help our future generations. So they'll know who they are. And a word is called Sankofa. We say, if hone na no we hone the day from, hone guai no we hone the guan. And so I think it's essential that in all of these arenas, especially the environmental arena, we speak, because so many people have wrote a narrative that said, people of color don't care about the environment. And we are all here as living proof that that's not true. So we speak into the existence what we want. And I speak into existence that it is the communities of people of color that will lead the way and how we heal Mother Earth so she continues to nurture us in the future.
Thank you. And thank you for that reframe of storytelling. I appreciate that as well. Deanne, did you have a question?
Not really. It's just that she was talking about the and I was talking about also in the rooms about the importance of the wetlands in between the island, that they form islands. Like in Puerto Rico, it's very important because it helps us with the erosion. It helps us with the acidity of the ecosystem. It's every branch of a wetland or mangrove that is in the sea is a whole ecosystem together. And in Puerto Rico, we don't fish like commercially. They fish for living. Because when these things happen, like climate change and the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, these two islands municipality were in there were no communication. So what they did, they just went together, went fishing, and the people who went very bad, they give the fish away. You know, it's the circle of life. And we have to respect that. And the nature is having us a wake-up call. So that's what I want to do. That's my story. I live in a Caribbean island, and I really think I'm responsible to help these wetlands to exist for my grandchildren.
Sí, gracias, mi hermana. And see, it's wonderful that you said that. And I've been to Puerto Rico a few times. I love it there. And we did the same thing. During the COVID pandemic, we didn't have to panic about the people's grocery stores. We fished. You see, we fished, we had food to farm, we did these things together. And so it's essential to us, like you said, to be stewards of this. So here we go. It's parallel cultures, it's parallel ways to thrive and survive, as long as we make sure that people don't continue to pollute our environment and we can get a balance back. So yes, gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Is there any other question?
Well, I'll mention while they wait and pause, I'm going to also drop in the chat. We have Gullah Geechee Create Day And we have also the Coastal Cultures Conference coming up. And I would love for you all to come and be able to volunteer with us in the wetlands here with some of the work that we're doing for Green and Gullah Geechee communities, and then just have a good time. You know, we love food, just like you all do. And so that we can have a good time, food and music and everything together. So I'll drop those links in the chat as well.
Thank you.
And we'd love for you to come.
Yes, thank you. Definitely would love to join. Olivia, did you have a question?
Yeah,
Olivia.
I did. Thank you.
And I have
And
to
I'm
keep up
excited
with
to
which Olivia, because I see my
Oh,
other
yeah.
Olivia here too. Olivia Lopez is here too. I'm like, okay, which Olivia? One's on my left and one's on my right.
That's true. That's true.
Thank you so much, Queen Bet. I have a question about what you think is effective storytelling, because I think, you know, there's telling stories, but then there's also how, like, through what mediums and what methods the stories are conveyed, whether they're documentaries, radio shows, podcasts, the conversations you have with people at your congregation or around your dinner table, the stories that you tell at the beginning of a meeting with a decision maker. Like, storytelling is this big amorphous thing. And so I wanted to ask you, what are some examples where of like different storytelling strategies that you saw happen that made change?
Interesting. I can only speak about myself on this one, because that's what some people are enamored by, the term that I came up with for myself, the artivist. And I'm writing a book about that because other people have tried to attempt to think they knew what it was without asking me, and I'm the one who created the word. And I'm like, that's not what it is. So I do my activism through the arts. And I started doing that because of just what you said. And I realized there's so many different mediums that could be utilized. And this was pre-social media, okay? So there was no social media when I started out. So I realized that not everyone receives information the same way. We don't all learn the same way because of our cultures, because of maybe different cognitive issues, different things like this. But I figured out that through dance, through music, through poetry, and definitely through food, right? People communicate, and all different people of different cultures will receive it. So I would speak about my culture, my community, and various things, whether they were the things that we have to fight against, like what I call destructionment, with all the destructionaires coming in wanting to build up all these houses and then push us out, or whether it was something celebratory, like some of our rituals and things like that. It didn't matter what it was. It made it something that people experienced. And once they have an experience, they hold on to that. So one person might tell me, oh, when you sang this song, it made me cry. The other person will say, when you did this particular move, oh my God, it was so beautiful, I'll never forget it. Someone else will say, you said this proverb and I wrote it down. Nowadays we tweet it, right? Or exit, I don't know. So here it is that these different methods and mediums depend on the audience. When you say what is the best thing to communicate, first know your audience. You need to know the audience, and then start to see what's important to that audience and what methods usually may work best with them. So now, in this age, as a computer scientist, I started up doing videos a lot. It's still, for artists, another medium that conveys things. And then because we have social media, we have YouTube, we have all this, you can convey it and someone doesn't have to, oh my God, I missed something. They can rewind it and they can watch it over and over if they need to get what it is, or they might not get it. And they might need to email you and say, what was it that you were saying? Or tweet you and say, I'd like you to elaborate. And that's when you know you've been effective. When people say, I saw you a year ago and you said this, and this made us do something. This made the policymakers start taking action. Or you have a politician come up to you and say, oh my God, what you just did was tremendous. I wish you could come to the Hill and do it just like that. And then last year I got invited to Capitol Hill's Ocean Week to do just what I do. Not have to get up there and make a speech, a written speech. you know, and be a talking head like them guys and girls usually are, but to do it a different way. But you can still make effective change, but know the audience first and then play to your gifts and your strengths. So if you know that you sing like somebody on I Can See Your Voice, the new show, and you know you're the bad singer, don't sing. All right. But if you're a poet, maybe that's the way to convey that message. And it might strike someone's soul in a way that if you just wrote it and you read it, it wouldn't, because you wouldn't feel it. You want to make sure that you feel it so you can make others feel it. So it doesn't matter which one of those mediums you choose to convey it. Make sure that it's going to make someone feel something, and then they'll always remember it and they'll tell someone else about it.
Thank you. So many nuggets. I was writing stuff down too. But thank you so much, Queen Quet. We will now pass it over to Francis to talk a little bit about Salt Lake.
Yay! All right, awesome. Thank you all. So yeah, if you've never been to the Great Salt Lake, it's located within the Salt Lake Valley, which is also known as Sungani. And this land is the land of the Utah Shoshone peoples and includes the Shoshone, Goshute, Ute, Paiute, and Navajo territories. But today we know it as Salt Lake Valley. Okay, so I guess we can go forward. So the city itself is named for the giant Salt Lake that is located sort of in the northern area of the city. And a lot of people know it for, I guess, well, many different things. It depends. Like some people like to go and drive to see the flat, sort of salty, the salt flats. Some people go out there and take a look at the brine shrimp and study how like salt forms on the surface of the lake. But from my lens, I am a wildlife biologist, and what I study and what my focus is on is birds. So lots and lots of birds. So the Great Salt Lake is a saline lake. It's not the only one, but it's a pretty well-known one. So saline lakes and their sort of associated wetlands throughout the Intermountain West, which is where I'm at, create sort of this network of habitats that millions of birds depend on. So for breeding, resting, feeding, migration, and wintering. So this is some examples of birds. We've got Wilson's phalaropes on the top left. We've got American white pelicans, black-necked stilts, and eared grebes. So these are just some examples of birds that rely on the Salt Lake and the surrounding wetlands. Like wetlands are very productive ecosystems. And even throughout the Salt Lake, like if you walk around the entire shore, you might notice that even though this is all like the same connected water body, there are many different types of like sand, plants, and other like microhabitats that you're seeing as you're walking around. So there could be places where there's like just salt flats and it's like crumbly and dry, versus there are some like little beaches that have something called oolitic sand, which is sand that has like mineral deposits and looks kind of like little egg shaped. And there are places where it's very marshy and like the Jordan River flows into the lake and creates like these very like mosquito heavy like wetlands that you're stomping around in, and you might step into mud, you might step into plants. So yeah, if we want to go on to the next slide. So it might be a little hard to see, but this is one of the maps that the Audubon group, who has a saline lakes program, has created to sort of track some of the migration of birds who are going in between these saline lake ecosystems. So collectively, they have published like an Arid West report, and saline lakes in the western sort of US and hemisphere support global populations of birds, which includes like 99% of the North American population of eared grebes, about 90% of our Wilson's phalaropes, and about 50% of American avocets. And so these saline lakes are very important to shorebirds, especially migratory shorebirds. So you can see like all of these little lines that are bouncing around in between these little pools of blue. So birds are not staying in one place. And this also means that when it comes to conserving wetlands and saline lakes, like the collapse of one saline lake ecosystem can be very detrimental to birds in many other places. So some of these other lakes include the Salton Sea, Lake Aber, Lahantan Wetlands, and Laguna Mar Chiquita, which is down all the way in Argentina. So, for example, Wilson's phalaropes, who you can see right on the shores of Utah, will be traveling all the way down to Argentina. And when it comes to like scientist working groups, we actually take a look and have to talk to scientists who are working down in some of the southern range. And one of the biggest concerns that we often talk about is like, how do we conserve wetlands, not only where we're at, but across like essentially borders, because those borders don't exist, really. They don't exist to birds, they don't exist to wildlife. And so the conservation of wetlands in one place very much affects populations in other places. And one of the most concerning things is very much water levels in saline lakes. So in the last like 100 years or so, they have declined dramatically due to like draining, diversion of the inflows, so all the rivers that feed into the lake, and groundwater extraction. And a lot of that increases the lake's salinity, really altering a lot of the food webs. And for example, like brine shrimp and other invertebrates that our birds depend on, very much those will be in flux. And when we think about like how does that affect our shorebirds, like there's less to eat. And with the decreasing water levels, Gunnison Island in the Great Salt Lake has been one of the biggest breeding colonies of American white pelicans. But this year, after talking with like the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, it used to be Gunnison Island, but it's now more like Gunnison Peninsula ? Because now there is so much less water that coyotes can just like walk across like the empty lake bed and start snacking on those baby pelicans. So it's something that we are very concerned about when it comes to like looking at population impact. All right, if we want to move forward. All right, and so these are just like some of the different ways that when we think about like conservation or storytelling, like who gets to tell the story of the lake and how many different ways do we tell the stories about like conservation and the lake? Coyotes are good. Olivia, I just saw your comment. Coyotes are good. They're not the enemy here, but it is something that we think about. But yeah, so like these are different pictures about different ways we are looking at conservation. So for example, like in my role as a scientist, I am going out on the beaches in the springtime to look for snowy plover eggs. So this is an example of like a nest that we found, because snowy plover are like, they have a very specialized type of nesting requirements, and it involves like searching for their nests and taking a look at like the types of disturbance that are on the lake. And when we think about disturbance, we're thinking about like, are people riding their ATVs and like crushing these nests? Or are people like walking along the shore? But then also taking that into a bigger context and saying like, how can we encourage people to like come to the lake, enjoy and recreate, and really form connections to the lake and the wildlife, while also making sure that we have the data to protect some of the birds and wildlife that are there. And yearly, my organization, Tracy Aviary, partners with another org called Sageland Collaborative on this Intermountain West Shorebird Survey. So that is across like sort of the Western US and Canada, where we have teams of community scientists and volunteers going out in the spring and summer to survey all of the shores of these wetlands, these marshes, and saline lake ecosystems. And so we're out there like counting as many birds as possible. But conservation and storytelling can also take other forms. So one of my great friends, Sarah, who is an artist and poet and organizer, this is one of her photos of organizing up at the Capitol. So she does a lot of cyanotype and art making, and they had all of these like puppets that they brought to the steps of the Capitol. And every day for the past couple of weeks now, they've been like marching around the Capitol and singing and creating song and music to sort of bring light to these issues. And when it comes to talking a little bit about poetry, there's another group who has just like released their Lake Words Volume 2, which is a collection of poetry about the lake, like people's connection to it, or just like ways of being with the lake. So I think when we think about like storytelling and conservation, like all of these different angles provide different narratives, because like science is one way of telling a story. Like, do we have data and numbers for these birds who are flying in and out? Where, and like very much like map making, versus the human connection of like music, words, like personal connections and stories. All right, if we want to go forward. All right, and so this is an example of the Mono Lake Phalarope Festival. So some of other partners who are scientists who are working on shorebird conservation hosted this festival to celebrate these long distance migratory birds. And this is, I think, a snippet of a little song / poem that they wrote. So this is very much coming from like scientists and directors and biologists who are like out there every day surveying birds, but sort of taking inspiration from that and trying to talk to people about the work that they're doing through another creative medium. Yeah. And so there's like, you can let everybody read that quietly for a little bit, because like it's supposed to be a song and I'm like, I'm not sure what the tune is, but so I think this is just an example of how like science doesn't always have to be like dry papers and journal articles. It can very much be a creative endeavor where you have been on the lake and you have seen like the trends that are happening with the data, and how do you sort of spark excitement about that, or how do you tell people like these are the things that I've seen and this is why I think we should be caring. All right, if we want to go forward. All right, so this is another example of eco-poetry that I really love from one of my favorite authors, Ashia Ajani. And this one I can read because it looks like kind of small, but this one is called Wasps. So in 2020, it was discovered that wasps are bioindicators of heavy metals in industrial areas. The markings on their faces, usually overlooked by casual viewers, reveal phenotypic effects of metal pollution. It's no secret I came out of my mama mad, black-striped and wrongly yellowed. Only recently I've begun to understand the depths of my own anger, the vengeance lingering like inheritance in my blood. Heavy metals such as lead and cadmium have been proven to cause tremors, irritability, behavioral issues, environmentally determined, geographically marred in markings, defined by poison that creeps under my exoskeleton. Only God can judge me, but it seems as though those crafted in his image seek annihilation for me and my minds, something quicker than the lead-laced purgatory they expect us to wallow in. I do what comes naturally. The earth has a long memory, and I've built my dream palace at the center of her toxic afterlife. I am a pollinator of my own design, a mean boozer buzzing around, fueled by fermented fruit, nobody's friend. Yet I do my own part to remind other creatures what is lost when green falls to gray. Child of the rust belt blues, industry sullies my skin deep silver. Once, one of the good humans set a bowl of water on his windowsill, the summer heat gasping raw metal. I watched my kin collapse, drowned in mercy. These thirsty poor things, desperate for relief beyond neglect's quiet. Fear streaks my face like war paint. My melanin wanes with every death note etched into an unviable seed. To be black is to weather toxic accumulation, to be made an example, but never deserving of a solution. I pray you never get close enough to see the damage. So, yeah, so this is one of my favorite authors, Ashia, who writes a lot of eco-poetry and talks about the experience being like Black and queer and very much growing up in the places that they are, like obviously like environmental pollution disproportionately affects communities of color and Black communities where Ashia grew up. So if we want to go forward another slide. So when it comes to sort of thinking about eco-poetry, the thing I like to talk about or think about is like, we have all of these like environmental issues, conservation issues, or like big words and jargon and data that we understand as scientists. But how do we sort of bridge that connection between like this scientific concept and then something that is very much our own story, like as Ashia does. So talking about the wasps that are indicators of pollution and chemical contamination, but connecting it sort of back to their own story of growing up in places like that. And like, how does a community face that? And how do you watch community go through that? So I guess in the time that we have right now, I have a prompt for if anybody is interested in writing their own little snippet of eco-poetry The prompt we have here is to explain a scientific word or concept through visual comparisons or connection to self, community, experiences, and stories. So, for example, if we start with the scientific word zuganru, which means it's sort of a word to describe the migratory restlessness that birds have. So if we know that this is like a scientific word, but how would we communicate that through our own experience? Or if we think of the word intertidal zone, like what experiences do I have personally, or what are parallels that I see in my community that I could write to? So I would just invite everyone in the few minutes that we have left to like sort of sit and think about some sort of like concept that has been sitting on your mind, and maybe do some writing. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It can just be like anything that comes to mind. And
Francis, I'm gonna set like a 3-minute timer and invite people to like get writing, and then when it goes off, I'd love to turn it over to the folks to see what they wrote down. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Olivia, do you want me to put the music on while we're writing?
Yes, that's a great idea. Thank you.
I put that on.
And we're starting now.
Madre de las islas, vivo en tu color.
Can you go back to the slide, please, Cumbia?
Yeah, I'll go back.
En tu alma, nuestro corazón, quien siembre cenizas, fuego encontrará. Esta es nuestra casa, nuestro Paraná. Si tocan al río, me tocan a mí. Soy hijo del monte y los camalotales. Si tocan al río, te tocan a vos. Somos el latido de estos humedales, padre de estas aguas. Vivo en tu fulgor. Esta es nuestra patria. No tiene color. Que la correntada se vuelva animal. Sagrado tesoro, nuestro litoral. Si tocan al río, me tocan a mí. Soy hijo del monte y los camalotales. Si tocan al río, te tocan a vos. Somos el rugido de estos humedales. Si tocan al río, me tocan a mí. Soy hijo del monte y los camalotales. Si tocan al río, te tocan a vos. Somos el latido de estos
we could turn off the music. Sorry, I was deep in writing. I was not paying attention, but thank you all for indulging in this poetry exercise. Thank you, Francis, for bringing this creative energy into the room. I see folks dropping in the chat some of what they wrote. That's awesome. I think maybe one person, if anybody wants to share. Well,
I'm willing to share mine, Maritza.
okay, yes, thank you.
Engineering, a manufactured construct to create God's creation, recreate God's creation, many times without calculating the measurement of impact on community, on family, on me, on the sea. See, I find this situation disturbing constantly, since folks do math and their formulas have a minus sign before culture or heritage or anything that's best. Yes, best, because they can't calculate what is priceless. So into environmental degradation we stare, because what God created, humans can't truly engineer.
Thank you. Wow. There's so many talented people here. Thank you, Queen, for sharing that with us. I think, unfortunately, Francis, if you wanted any last words, definitely hand it back to you, and then we're handing it to Val.
I think that was the end of my presentation. So we're all good.
Well, can we get a big round of virtual and real behind your screen applause for our amazing guest presenters? Sharing your emojis and your reactions, dropping them in the chat, or coming off mute. Gracias, Jennifer. Or off on camera, that is. All right, Val, take it over.
My gosh, closing it out. Thank you so much to our guest speakers and everyone for attending. Honestly, got chills just, reading and hearing people's beautiful art. And, that's just amazing to be able to take some time today to be able to come together and talk about wetlands. So thank you so much. And if you enjoyed today's Encuentro, please make your membership official. You're part of the Blog Colectivo, but are you an official Green Latinos member? There are definitely some benefits. And we have a free membership, as well as if you'd like to donate something, we also have various tiers of that as well. But aside from, being able to join the Blog Encuentros, we have various benefits. And so that includes building the, tapping into that Green Latinos network and opportunities to be able to amplify and support your own work, whether that's in your local community or other initiatives that you're doing, whether it's regional or national. And of course, you'd be invited to participate in Green Latinos events, as well as develop research, one pagers and reports in order to be able to use in your own advocacy. And we also want to make sure that we keep our members updated. So any particular new news related to environmental justice policy is always something that we try to reach out, as well as opportunities for career development. Next slide, please. And I will make sure to drop the joining link if you're interested and are not an official Green Latinos member. And then the other thing, as I mentioned, if you like the Encuentro, please give us your feedback. Or if you have new ideas, if this sparks something that you're like, I would love it if the Blog was able to do an Encuentro related to this, please fill out our survey. We, love feedback. We want to make sure that this is reflective on what you're interested in, and want to continue to have you all be engaged. So please let us know if you want to help participate and build out an Encuentro. We are more than happy to, continue to have these levels of conversation, but we need to hear from you in order to know what y'all want to see. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I know that's a lot of text, but we are looking for a co-chair for the block. And so that's usually someone that is outside of, you know, the Green Latino staff who is working 2 to 4 hours a week, no more than 15 hours a month, in order to be able to support the block and making sure that we're reaching out to our members and working on the newsletter and other ways that we stay in contact with our block members and Green Latinos members as a whole. Something that I also want to note, right, aside from the time commitment, if you're interested, but you know, you don't have this as a function of your regular work week in terms of being able to do outreach, we do have a stipend for an as needed basis. So please apply. Don't let that time commitment, if you're thinking about like, how do I do this outside of work? We got you. So please apply if you're interested. We're really hoping to be able to fill that co-chair position. And again, I have the application set on the link, and we'll make sure to follow up with those links and any resources that our guest speakers have to share with y'all. And I think that's the end in terms of the announcements. I just want to say thank you so much for attending, and please continue to engage and reach out to us in any way. And of course, the speakers may have already shared ways to keep in contact, but if y'all would be so kind to also drop those in right now, I think that would pretty much tie up the rest of the Encuentro. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all. We will definitely share recording and resources afterwards in case you don't get it in the chat.
Gracias todos. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all.
Peace and blessings, y'all.
Thank you.